First Minister, you posted a video this morning of your mother-in-law in Gaza. Can you give us an update on their situation, first of all?
Well, first of all, it's just heartbreaking, distressing. Not just the situation my mother-in-law and father-in-law are in, and you can see the heartbreak and the worry and the concern that my mother-in-law has, but for all of the innocent men, women and children in Gaza who have nothing to do with Hamas, want to live their ordinary lives, normal lives, who work, many of them children. We know 50% of Gaza, over 50% of Gaza is children, and they're being punished for the crimes of a despicable terror group that has carried out these atrocities, but they have nothing to do with them. And that's why my plea for days now has been for a humanitarian corridor to be opened up. It allows supplies to come in, but crucially it allows people to get out, innocent men, women and children to get out.
And how is your family though at the moment? Obviously we saw a very emotional video this morning. Are you still able to have contact with them?
I mean, they're devastated. It comes on and off, the communications. We get a flurry of messages and then it will be silent for many hours. And that's obviously when me and my wife will worry the most, and then there'll be another flurry of messages. So far they're safe, but in a war zone, as we know. And every hour that goes on, we worry more and more for their lives, but also for the fact that they have no supplies. There's no supplies coming into Gaza. And the food they have and the clean drinking water they have is really running to a bare minimum.
And obviously you're making efforts to try and get them out of there. Can you give us an update on that, or is there any progress whatsoever in trying to get them to a safe area?
So we'll continue to obviously liaise with the Foreign Office and other governments where appropriate, but at the moment there's no way out for them.
And on a personal level, how are you managing to balance the personal with the political as well, and keep any focus on things out with what's going on there?
Well, I have to. That is the nature of the job, and look, I hope that people have seen through the comments that I've made for over the last 6 days that I understand that ultimately, above and beyond the geopolitics, we're talking about people's lives. And I was with, for example, the Jewish community last night in a service of prayer. We know we lost, sadly, Bernard Cowan. I met his mother yesterday. I'll be meeting with Palestinian leaders later today, because ultimately this is a human tragedy. Innocent people, as I say, men, women and children, have lost their life. Whether you're Palestinian, Israeli, Arab, Muslim, Jew, Christian, atheist, agnostic, ultimately this is people's sons, daughters, grandchildren that have lost their lives.
I'll move on in a second. I just want to get a sense of what it is like for you dealing with that, with your family there. And where are they, and are they moving south at the moment? Are they in the north, Gaza?
They're not in the north, no. They're quite central, but right, more towards the south, or in a neighbourhood called Derbala, which is in the centre, but more towards the south. But what it means for them is that the family that is in the north, so my wife's auntie, for example, is in the north, they will move. So that house at the moment that has 10 people in it is likely, they think, to have around 40 people in it, with diminishing supplies, no electricity or reduced electricity, no fuel supplies coming in, no food supplies coming in, no water, clean water coming in. That already was stretched amongst 10 people. They now think they're going to have, by the end of the day, possibly 40 people in that house. So as I say, it is a humanitarian disaster which is becoming very quickly a complete catastrophe.
I want to move on to domestic matters now. Obviously we're talking about the run-up to your conference in a couple of days. It hasn't been the ideal preparation for the conference with events going on. Were you surprised that Lisa Cameron had defected to the Conservatives?
Not hugely surprised. Lisa Cameron, for example, we know wrote to the Secretary of State for Scotland urging him to intervene to veto legislation that was passed by the Scottish Parliament. So not all that surprising. At the same time, really disappointing, and not just disappointing for me, of course it is that, but disappointing for her constituents, who will definitely feel let down. They voted for an SNP MP. They wanted somebody who represents their values to represent them. They did that based on the fact that Lisa was standing on the SNP ticket. She's let them down. The honourable thing, the right thing to do, of course, for not to her to cross the floor and defect to the Conservative and Unionist Party, but to step down and there to be a by-election.
Is there a toxic and bullying culture within your Westminster group, as she's alleging?
No.
Will you be looking into that?
I already have, and in fact, Stephen Flynn, our leader, of course, of the Westminster Group, Mary Black, the deputy leader of the Westminster Group, met with Lisa Cameron just a number of weeks ago to discuss these issues. And Stephen himself has said, and I repeat, that we refute the claims that there's a toxic or bullying culture. Disagreements, for sure. Differences, for sure. Are they aired robustly? Definitely. That is the nature of our political discourse, but I reject that there's been a toxic or bullying culture.
But within the past week, you've had a pretty brutal defeat in a by-election. You've had one of your MPs defecting to the Conservatives. Are you still in control of your party?
Yes, very much in control of the party, but clearly Rutherglen was always going to be difficult. We know that. You've been reporting on it for months.
But it was the scale of the defeat there, I think, which perhaps took a lot of people by surprise.
Well, we were prepared for a really disappointing night, given the contextual factors, but not just the fact that there was those really difficult factors, such as Margaret Ferrier's reckless actions, the ongoing police investigation, but we'll also listen to the message that the voters in Rutherglen and Hamilton West are telling us. We'll actually proactively go in to Rutherglen and Hamilton West and ask people, well, why is it that you didn't put your trust in the SNP? Why did you? We know we had support, but it didn't come out on the day.
You are looking at the prospect of potentially having just a handful of MPs after the next election. If this by-election defeat is anything to go by, you risk losing your third-party status at Westminster and potentially even that, the question at Prime Minister's Questions, for example.
Now, you have been covering enough by-elections to know that you can't extrapolate what happens in a by-election with a 37% turnout onto what happened in a general election. That is not to say, of course, that we don't take what happened in Rutherglen and Hamilton West as a serious wake-up call. We have to. And we've got to make sure our message to the voters at a general election is understood, is crisp, is coherent. And that message, ultimately, in an election that will undoubtedly be about change, actually the real change doesn't come from Westminster that turns blue to red. Real change comes from moving away from that failed Westminster economic model. Real change comes with independence.
The big issue that has been the big issue for many years now is the fact that Westminster continues to say no to a referendum, and there doesn't seem to be any plan to get beyond that. What is the plan if they say no again?
First of all, you're absolutely right about the diagnosis of the problem. The problem is, of course, that Westminster continues to deny democracy. They continue to deny Scotland the right to choose its own future. That is despite the UK party saying that we're in a voluntary union. Well, if we are in a voluntary union, how on earth do you leave it? But what's essential to any plan working is making sure you have consistent majority support for independence. And the party, I know, realises that in order, whatever the plan is, the only way you win is having that consistent majority. So process is one issue, and we'll debate that on Sunday. But the other issue has to be driving up support for independence to make it impossible for the Westminster parties to turn around and say no.
There is a case that on a number of issues you have lost some faith among voters, Rutherglen being some evidence of that. There is damage to your reputation as a competent government. There aren't clear plans in place at the moment for independence, so a lot of people who would have voted SNP in the past might be asking, well, what's the point in voting SNP next time round?
Well, here's the point. First of all, the major issue that people are facing is the cost of living crisis. That's a cost of Westminster crisis. It wasn't created here in Scotland. It was created by the Westminster parties. I'm being straight and up front with you. There's no magical mechanism outside of a referendum. There's no magical mechanism to get independence. It relies, of course, on creating the political conditions, increasing political support for independence, so it becomes the consistent majority of the people of Scotland.
How long have you got to prove yourself as First Minister?
I'm focused absolutely on the day job of delivering for the people on the issues that matter to them. That is the cost of living crisis, our NHS, our public services, and our economy. All three of those, of course, inextricably linked to the fact that we are not independent.
First Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.